My final mission came faster than I expected. One moment I was reviewing security protocols in the operations room of our base in Afghanistan. The next I was packing my duffel bag. 40 years in uniform had taught me to move quickly. But this felt different. I wasn't just leaving a mission. I was leaving behind the only life I'd known since I was 18. In my jacket pocket, my father's pocket watch pressed against my chest. He'd given it to me before my first deployment, whispering, "Always come home, Shirley." I had, time and again, but this return wasn't planned. After 4 decades of service, Colonel Shirley Grant was officially retiring. And I hadn't told anyone, not even my son, Mark. The overnight flight to Miami stretched like an endless ribbon of darkness and engine hum. I stared out the window at the thin line of dawn stretching across the Atlantic, wondering if Mark would be at work or still asleep when I knocked on his door. I hadn't seen him in nearly 2 years. Our schedules, his life, my deployments always seeming to pull in opposite directions. I pictured his smile, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners just like his father's had, and it was enough to carry me through the turbulence. By the time we landed, the Florida heat wrapped around me like a heavy blanket, instantly pulling sweat from my skin despite the early hour. The taxi driver loaded my duffel without a word, barely glancing at my uniform. "Naples," I told him, giving Mark's address in the quiet neighborhood he'd moved to 5 years ago after his promotion. As we pulled onto the highway, palm trees swayed in the humid morning air, and I tried to ignore the tightness in my chest. We hadn't spoken much lately. Our last 3 scheduled video calls had been canceled twice by me due to urgent military matters, once by him because of some work emergency, but I'd always believed we could pick up where we left off. Mark was my only child, my only family since his father died in combat 20 years ago. We'd been through too much together to let distance matter. The cab turned onto his street, and something in me shifted. The well-maintained homes with their neat lawns and trimmed hedges looked peaceful in the morning light. But Mark's house stood out immediately, and not in a good way. The grass had grown wild and uneven, nearly hiding the stone path to the front door. The mailbox tilted to one side, stuffed with envelopes that spilled onto the ground. All the curtains were drawn tight against the windows, and the cheerful blue paint I'd helped him choose years ago now peeled in places, neglected and fading. It didn't look like a home. It looked like a place abandoned. I climbed out, the heat already biting at my neck despite the early hour, and was about to knock when a familiar voice called from across the street. "Colonel Grant, is that you, Mrs. Wilson?" Mark's neighbor since he bought the place stood in her driveway with a watering can in hand. Even from this distance, I could see how pale her face had become, how her eyes widened at the sight of me. "Hello, Evelyn," I said, walking toward her. Her garden was immaculate as always, roses climbing trellises and birds chirping from feeders hanging from the eaves of her porch. I thought I'd surprise Mark. She set down her watering can, both hands now fidgeting with the hem of her gardening apron. "Oh, Shirley," she said, my first name strange on her lips after years of calling me Colonel. "You don't know, do you?" My voice remained steady, but my fingers tightened around the watch in my pocket. "Know what Mrs. Wilson glanced back at Mark's house, then lowered her voice even though no one else was around. "Mark's been in the ICU for 2 weeks now. They took him by ambulance in the middle of the night. I heard the sirens and saw the lights." She hesitated, looking down at her garden shoes. "And Jennifer," she stopped again, something like disgust flashing across her face. "What about Jennifer?" I pressed, thinking of my daughter-in-law, the woman Mark had married 3 years ago after a whirlwind 6-month courtship. "She's been on a yacht in the Keys," Mrs. Wilson finally said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "Been posting pictures all over Facebook, parties, shopping sprees, you name it. All while Mark's been—" Her voice trailed off, unable to finish. The air seemed to thicken around me as I stood there, her words settling like lead in my chest. I must have swayed slightly because Mrs. Wilson reached out to steady me, her gardening roughened hand gripping my arm. "Naples, General," she said. "I've been bringing his mail in. Left it on the kitchen counter. But," she shook her head, "I don't think anyone's been home since they took him. I don't remember thanking her. I don't remember getting back into the taxi." One moment I was standing in Mrs. Wilson's neat garden with the scent of roses in the air. The next I was pushing through the hospital's sliding glass doors, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. The air inside was sharp with disinfectant, the kind that clings to your clothes long after you've left. At the reception desk, I gave my name and Mark's. The nurse's eyes flickered with recognition when I mentioned my son's name, and something in her expression made my stomach drop. "5th floor," she said quietly. "Room 512. The ICU waiting room is just off the elevator." I took the elevator up, gripping my father's pocket watch so hard the metal dug into my palm. My mind raced with possibilities, each worse than the last. Mark had always been healthy, active, strong, just like his father. What could have happened in the mere months since our last video call? The hallway of the ICU was quiet, except for the steady, mechanical beeping of monitors and the occasional squeak of nurses' shoes on the polished floor. Room 512 had a small window in the door, but the curtain inside was drawn, hiding whatever waited for me. I knocked gently, then pushed the door open without waiting for a response. When I stepped into Mark's room, the monitor sounds were louder, inescapable. My son lay on the bed, his skin sallow and stretched too tight across his cheekbones. His frame, once broad and strong like his father's, seemed shrunken beneath the thin hospital gown. Tubes and wires traced over him like a cruel map, leading to machines that beeped and hummed with artificial life. A man in a white coat turned from the monitor he'd been studying. He looked exhausted, dark circles rimming his eyes behind wire-framed glasses. "I'm Dr. Thomas Reynolds," he said, his voice low but firm. "Are you family?" "I'm his mother," I managed. "Colonel Shirley Grant. What happened to my son, Dr.?" Reynolds gestured to the single chair beside Mark's bed, but I remained standing. "Mr. Grant has advanced gastric cancer," he said, cutting straight to the point in a way I would normally appreciate. "Terminal. If we'd caught it earlier, there might have been options, but it's metastasized to his liver and lymph nodes." He paused, glancing down at Mark's still form. "He's been here 2 weeks. No visitors." The words felt unreal, as if they belonged to someone else's life, someone else's son. I moved closer, my fingers brushing the back of Mark's hand. His skin was cold, the veins fragile under my touch. "Has his wife been notified?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Dr." Reynolds's expression tightened. "We've called the emergency contact numbers on file multiple times, the first few days. Mrs. Grant answered, said she was out of town and would come when she returned. After that, our calls went straight to voicemail." I looked down at my son. This man I'd carried inside me, had raised alone after his father died. His eyelids fluttered. Slowly, they opened, and I saw the same hazel eyes I'd watched light up when he was a boy on the baseball field, when he graduated from college, when he told me he'd met someone special. "Mom?" His voice was barely a whisper, cracked and dry. "You're really here?" "I'm here, Mark," I said, taking his hand fully in mine now. "I'm right here." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I wanted to call you, my phone." He trailed off, too weak to finish. "Shh, don't worry about that now," I said, falling back into the rhythm of comforting him just as I had when he was small and woke from nightmares. "I'm not going anywhere." His eyes locked with mine, a sudden clarity shining through the medication haze. "I love you, Mom," he whispered, his voice faint as breath. Before I could answer, The monitor's steady beeping turned into one long, piercing tone. Mark's hand went limp in mine. "Doctor," Reynolds moved with practiced urgency, pressing a button on the wall that brought nurses rushing in. Someone guided me away from the bed, into the hall. "Code Blue, ICU room 512, a voice announced over the speaker system. I stood frozen outside the door, hearing the flurry of commands, the shuffle of feet, the thud of hands against my son's chest. The hallway tilted slightly, and I pressed my palm flat against the wall to steady myself. I'd faced enemy fire, made life-or-death decisions that affected entire units, but nothing had prepared me for this moment. Minutes later, though it felt like hours, the door opened. Dr. Frey Reynolds stepped out, his expression heavy, shoulders slumped. "I'm sorry, Colonel Grant," he said. "We did everything we could." The watch in my hand felt heavier than it ever had, and all I could think was that I had come home too late. The drive back to Mark's house was a blur. The taxi driver kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror, perhaps concerned by my silence or the way I stared straight ahead, seeing nothing of the palm trees and blue sky outside the window. The hospital had given me Mark's personal effects in a clear plastic bag, his wallet, a watch I'd given him for his 30th birthday, his phone with a dead battery, and a simple gold wedding band. I clutched the bag on my lap, my thumb rubbing absently over the curve of his watch through the plastic. When the taxi pulled up to Mark's house, I paid without registering the amount, then stood on the sidewalk watching the car drive away. The house looked even more neglected in the harsh afternoon sun. A wind chime hanging from the porch, a gift I'd sent from Japan during one deployment, twisted silently, its music stolen by disuse and weather. The keys to Mark's house felt foreign in my hand as I stepped onto the porch. Dead leaves had collected in the corners, skittering across the wooden planks as a hot breeze picked up. When I pushed the door open, a stale wave of air hit me, the kind that settles in when no one has cared for a place in weeks. The living room was dim, curtains pulled tight against the sunlight. Empty glasses sat on the coffee table, a thin layer of dust coating their rims. A half-empty bottle of scotch stood beside them, cap missing. The framed photos I remembered seeing during my last visit, Mark's college graduation, our fishing trip to Montana, his wedding day, were gone from the mantel, leaving lighter rectangles on the faded paint. In the kitchen, takeout containers and unwashed dishes were stacked haphazardly in the sink, a sour smell rising from them. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sign of life. On the counter, I found the pile of mail Mrs. Wilson had mentioned, leaning against the wall like a small paper tower. I tore through the envelope's utility shutoff warnings, overdue credit card statements, late mortgage notices. My chest tightened as I flipped through them. Mark had never been careless with money. Even as a teenager, he'd saved his allowance, planning for purchases weeks in advance. The disarray around me, the mounting bills, none of it fit the son I knew. A framed photo lay face down on the counter. I picked it up, wiping dust from the glass with my thumb. It was from their wedding day, Mark in his suit, Jennifer in her flowing white dress, both smiling at the camera. She was striking, with her sleek black hair and practiced smile. Designer shoes that had probably cost more than my monthly retirement check would be. I set the photo down, unable to reconcile the smiling woman in the image with someone who would abandon my son in his greatest time of need. The house had 3 bedrooms: the master, a guest room, and the small room Mark had set up as a home office. I moved into the office first, finding the chair slightly askew, as if someone had left in a hurry. Papers littered the desk, some crumpled, others folded neatly. A laptop sat closed at the center, its charging cable dangling empty to the floor. Among the papers, I found a thick stack of receipts. The first was for a yacht rental in Key West, $75,000 for a week, dated just days after Mark had been admitted to the ICU. Another from Cartier in Miami showed nearly $50,000 for jewelry. There were dinners at oceanfront resorts, luxury clothing boutiques all charged to Mark's credit card. The dates lined up too neatly with the days I knew he had been lying in that hospital bed, alone and dying. I sat down hard in the desk chair, the receipts trembling in my hands. Jennifer's face filled my mind, the smile she'd worn in their wedding photo, the laugh I'd heard during our few video calls together. I had tried to be welcoming when Mark introduced us, had pushed aside my concerns about their hasty engagement for his sake. I had trusted her to stand beside my son, to care for him when I couldn't be there. Instead, she'd been draining his accounts while he fought for his life alone. I pressed the receipts into a neat stack, each one a quiet accusation, and knew this was only the beginning of what I was going to find. Setting them aside, I tried Mark's laptop, but it was password protected. His phone from the hospital bag was dead, the charger nowhere in sight. Moving to the master bedroom felt like an invasion, but I needed to understand what had happened here. The king-sized bed was unmade, sheets tangled as if someone had left in a hurry. Mark's side, I could tell from the reading glasses on the nightstand, was relatively neat. Jennifer's side was a chaos of discarded clothes, empty shopping bags from luxury brands, and makeup items scattered across the surface of an ornate vanity. The closet told another story. Mark's clothes, the suits he wore to work at the architectural firm. His weekend jeans and t-shirts hung neatly on one side. Jennifer's side was half empty, expensive hangers tossed on the floor as if she'd packed in a rush, taking only her most valuable pieces. In the master bathroom, I found prescription bottles lined up on the counter. I picked one up, reading the label hydrocodone, prescribed to Mark Grant 2 months ago. The bottle was nearly full, another for nausea medication, barely touched, a third for stomach acid, almost empty. He'd been sick longer than anyone realized, treating symptoms without knowing their cause. I returned to the kitchen, where the pile of mail waited like a silent accusation. Sitting at the table, I sorted it methodically, creating separate stacks: bills, personal correspondence, junk mail. Near the bottom of the pile, I found a letter from Mark's medical insurance company, dated 3 weeks ago. It was a notification of claim denial. A CT scan and specialist consultation had been rejected as not medically necessary without prior authorization. The letter had been opened, then resealed sloppily. Someone had read it and decided it wasn't important enough to act on. My hands were steady as I reached for my phone, decades of military crisis management keeping my emotions in check, even as rage built inside me. Jennifer's number was still saved in my contacts, though I hadn't used it in months. For a moment, I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over her name. The weight of what I'd just discovered pushed me forward. I tapped the call button. It rang once, twice, then connected to video. Jennifer's face appeared, framed by the blinding white of a yacht deck. Music thumped in the background, mingled with bursts of laughter. She was wearing oversized sunglasses, her dark hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail, skin bronzed from days in the sun. In one hand, she held a stemmed glass, a bright orange drink sloshing against the rim. Behind her, people in swimwear danced and shouted over the wind. "Well, look who finally decided to call," she said, smiling like we were old friends catching up. "The military must have finally let you have a day off." I said nothing, simply watching her. The seconds stretched between us, her smile faltering slightly at my silence. "Is something wrong?" she finally asked, pushing her sunglasses to the top of her head. "You look different." "Mark's gone," I said flatly, my voice steadier than I expected. Her smile faltered for a heartbeat. Then she shrugged, taking a slow sip from her glass. "It was inevitable. You know, he'd been sick for a while. Nothing anyone could do." I felt the air tighten in my lungs, but I didn't let it show. "And the charges on his card, the yacht rentals, the jewelry." Her laugh was short, careless. I'm his wife, Shirley. What's his is mine. That's how marriage works. The ease with which she said it was almost more shocking than the words themselves. She didn't even try to pretend remorse or grief. I studied her face for a long second, memorizing every detail the designer sunglasses pushed up into her perfectly styled hair, the shimmer of gold hoops in her ears, the way one perfectly manicured hand lazily swirled her drink. "Enjoy the view while it lasts," I said quietly. She tilted her head as if she'd heard a compliment. "Oh, I will." "That," I said, leaning forward so my face filled the screen, "was your last party on my dime." I ended the call before she could respond, the image of her frozen mid-smirk lingering on the black screen. Setting the phone down, I reached for my father's pocket watch, the cool metal steadying me. It was time to make sure Jennifer never touched another cent of what Mark left behind. The hospital corridor seemed longer when I returned that evening. Each step echoed against the polished floor as I made my way to the room where my son's body still lay. Dr. Reynolds had agreed to let me have some time with Mark before they moved him to the funeral home. "We're not supposed to do this," he'd said over the phone, his voice softening when I explained the situation. "But given the circumstances, take as long as you need." "Colonel." A different nurse led me to the room, her shoes squeaking softly against the floor. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said as she opened the door. "I was on duty when they brought him in. He asked about his wife every day that first week." The words twisted something inside me, but I nodded my thanks. When she closed the door, leaving me alone with Mark, the silence felt absolute. They had removed all the tubes and wires, switched off the machines. He looked peaceful now, the pain erased from his face. But he wasn't my Mark anymore. This was just the shell he'd left behind. I sat beside him, taking his cold hand in mine. "I'm sorry I wasn't here sooner," I whispered. "I should have visited more, should have seen the signs." My mind flashed back to our last video call, months ago. He'd looked tired, had lost weight I'd attributed to stress at work. When I'd asked if he was sleeping enough, he'd laughed it off. "Just busy with a big project," he'd said. "Nothing to worry about." Had he already known then? Had he been protecting me from the truth? Not wanting to worry me while I finished my final deployment on the small table beside the bed? Someone had placed his wedding ring. I picked it up, turning it over in my palm. Inside, an inscription caught the light. "Forever yours, J." A promise as empty as Jennifer's grief. I slipped the ring into my pocket alongside my father's watch. Mark had treasured both these men in his life, the father he'd lost too young, and the woman who'd abandoned him at the end. One had given everything, the other had only taken. "I'll make this right," I promised him, squeezing his hand one last time. "Whatever it takes." The walk back through the hospital felt like moving through water, each step requiring conscious effort. At the nurse's station, I paused. "Was there anyone else?" I asked the nurse who'd let me in. "Any friends who visited, called to check on him." She checked the visitor log, flipping back through several pages. "Just one," she said finally. "A Thomas Wilson. Came by 3 times. Brought books and a portable radio." She looked up. "That's all we have on record. Thomas Wilson, Mrs. Wilson's son." I remembered Mark mentioning him as a childhood friend who'd moved back to Naples a few years ago. At least someone had cared enough to visit. Outside, the Florida evening was settling in, bringing little relief from the day's heat. I sat in my rental car, staring at the hospital's illuminated entrance. For 40 years, I'd lived by military protocol, had always known the next step to take. Now, faced with my son's death and his wife's betrayal, I felt unmoored, adrift in civilian waters too murky to navigate. But one thing was clear: I needed to understand what had happened to Mark's finances before Jennifer could do any more damage. Back at the house, I forced myself to be methodical. In Mark's office, I searched through drawers until I found a leather portfolio embossed with his initials, a gift from me when he graduated architecture school. Inside were his important documents: birth certificate, social security card, marriage license, and tucked in a side pocket, a sealed envelope with power of attorney typed neatly across the front. I tore it open, scanning the legal document inside. Mark had granted me power of attorney before my last deployment, a precaution we'd both agreed on, in case something happened to him while I was overseas and unreachable. It had seemed unlikely we'd ever need it, but Mark had always been thorough, planning for contingencies like the soldier's son he was. The document was properly notarized, dated 18 months ago. It had never been revoked. My hands were steadier now, my military training taking over. I had a mission, clear parameters, and the authority to act. I began taking photos of everything: the receipts, the bills, the prescription bottles, the power of attorney. Evidence secured. Mission parameters established. Next, I needed reinforcements. By the next morning, I was on the road to Tampa with a folder full of receipts in the passenger seat, and Mark's notarized power of attorney tucked safely inside my bag. The miles blurred past, the steady hum of the highway matching the rhythm of my resolve. I had one person in mind who could make this happen without delay: Colonel Richard Hayes, once my commanding officer, later a trusted friend. After his retirement 5 years earlier, Richard had moved into military financial administration, the kind of position where phone calls got answered and paperwork moved fast. His office was in a modern building near MacDill Air Force Base, all glass and steel gleaming in the morning sun. The receptionist recognized my uniform immediately, standing a little straighter as I approached. "Colonel Grant to see Colonel Hayes," I said, using my rank even though, technically, I was already retired. "He's expecting me." Richard met me at the door to his office, his handshake firm, his eyes assessing. He'd aged since I'd seen him last, more silver in his close-cropped hair, deeper lines around his eyes, but his posture remained parade ground perfect. "Shirley," he said as he closed the door behind us. "It's been, 3 years? You look He stopped, noticing something in my expression. "I can tell this isn't just a social visit." The smell of old wood and fresh coffee greeted me as I took the seat he offered. His office was exactly what I'd expected: military neat, with photographs of fighter jets on the walls, service medals displayed in a simple frame behind his desk. "My son died yesterday," I said without preamble. "Terminal cancer. While he was in the ICU for the past 2 weeks, his wife was in the Keys, spending his money like water." Richard's expression hardened. "I'm sorry, Shirley, truly." I set the folder on his desk and opened it to the first yacht receipt. These were charged to Mark's accounts while he was in the ICU, unable to even pick up a phone. I pulled out the power of attorney. "And here's the POA he signed before my last deployment. I need everything frozen, every account, every card, today." Richard flipped through the papers, his brow tightening with each page. He paused at a photo of Jennifer on the yacht, her social media post still visible with the timestamp corresponding to Mark's 3rd day in intensive care. "You don't have to explain further," he said, setting the folder down. "Let's get to work." For the next 40 minutes, the room was filled with the tapping of keys and the shuffle of documents as Richard made call after call. He had connections at 3 major banks and knew exactly which departments to contact, which forms to request, which phrases would cut through bureaucratic delays. I watched each step like I was tracking an operation in the field, mentally noting procedures I might need again. Richard was thorough, checking and double-checking account numbers, explaining the situation in clear terms that left no room for argument. "Yes, I understand this is unusual," he said to one bank manager, his voice crisp. "But we have clear evidence of exploitation of an incapacitated individual and a valid power of attorney executed prior to incapacitation. I can have JAG counsel on the line in 5 minutes if you prefer to discuss legal implications. The threat was enough. One by one, the dominoes fell, checking accounts frozen, credit cards canceled, automated payments suspended. Finally, Richard slid a printout across the desk. All accounts frozen, linked cards canceled, remaining balances transferred to a holding account in your name as power of attorney. The mortgage payment that was due went through this morning. I prioritized that one. I exhaled slowly, the first real breath I'd taken since walking into Mark's hospital room. Thank you, Richard. I can't tell you what this means. Don't thank me yet, he said with a small, knowing look. She's going to come at you hard. Women like that, they don't give up money without a fight. He was right. Before I even left the parking lot, my phone lit up with Jennifer's name. I let it ring, watching as voicemail notifications began to appear. The first few messages were full of curses and threats, her voice rising with each call. By the third, her tone had shifted, becoming softer, almost pleading. Shirley, please, she said, the sounds of the yacht party now conspicuously absent. I know you're upset, and I understand, but I just need access to cover some expenses. We can work this out, mother to daughter-in-law. Call me back. Not once did she say Mark's name. Not once did she express grief or regret. I let the phone ring, the vibrations against my palm a reminder that this was only the first step. The real fight was still ahead. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Mark's driveway as I returned from Tampa. 2 days since I'd arrived in Naples, and already the world had shifted beyond recognition. My retirement, once the beginning of a new chapter, now felt like an irrelevant footnote to this unexpected tragedy. Mrs. Wilson was watering her front garden when I pulled up. She set down her hose and crossed the street, concern etched into the lines around her eyes. "How are you holding up?" she asked, her voice gentle. "I'm managing," I said, surprising myself with how steady I sounded. "Thank you for checking on Mark's house while he was away," she nodded, glancing at the neglected yard. "Thomas went to see him several times. You know, they weren't close as adults, but when he heard—" She trailed off, then squared her shoulders. "Would you like some help getting things in order? I'm pretty handy with a lawnmower, and Thomas could come by this weekend to fix that loose gutter." The offer of practical help, so straightforward and genuine, nearly broke through my composure. "That would be wonderful," I managed. "But first, I need to get the inside sorted." She seemed to understand, patting my arm gently. "One step at a time, Colonel. That's how we get through." Back inside, I went straight to the study. The room smelled faintly of old paper and dust, the blinds half closed against the afternoon sun. Mark's desk was cluttered but organized in its own way, neat stacks of documents, a few opened envelopes, pens lined up in a coffee mug printed with the logo of his architectural firm. I started with the top drawer, sifting through folders of insurance papers and tax forms, looking for anything that might give me a clearer picture of his finances and his marriage. The second drawer held old sketchbooks filled with Mark's architectural drawings, bridges, and buildings rendered in precise, careful lines. I paused, running my fingers over a sketch of a modernist house he'd designed in graduate school. He'd had such dreams then, such talent. In the bottom drawer, beneath a stack of computer manuals, I found a small leather-bound notebook, the kind Mark had kept since college for jotting down ideas and reminders. The cover was worn at the edges, the spine creased from use. I sat at his desk and opened it. The first few pages were lists of household chores and grocery items, interspersed with measurements for home improvement projects. But then the entries changed. Each line carried a date, an amount, and a short note in his careful handwriting. March 8th, $3,000 for Jennifer's medical procedure. Specialist not covered by insurance. April 12th, $5,500 for roof repairs after storm damage. May 3rd, $7,000 for new car transmission. Labor costs higher than expected. I flipped through page after page, my stomach tightening. The amounts grew larger over time, each with some justification attached, all for Jennifer's needs or household emergencies. The final entry, dated just 3 weeks ago, read $12,000 for Jennifer's mother's emergency surgery in California, flight plus hospital expenses. I reached for my bag and pulled out the bank statements I'd collected from the mail pile, cross-checking each entry with the statements. The truth came fast and cold. The March 8th medical procedure matched a charge at a high-end spa in Palm Beach. The roof repairs lined up perfectly with a payment to a luxury boutique in Miami. The car transmission was the exact amount of a down payment on a designer watch. And Jennifer's mother, she'd died 3 years ago. Mark had mentioned it during one of our calls, how Jennifer had been too distraught to even attend the funeral. I leaned back, gripping the notebook as though it might burn me. Mark had trusted her completely, and she had taken every ounce of that trust to fund her vanity. For how long had it started immediately after their wedding? Or had there been a time when she truly cared for him? Needing more, I picked up Mark's phone from the hospital bag and found his charger in the desk drawer. Once it powered on, I was relieved to see it had no passcode typical Mark, always believing the best of people, never imagining someone might abuse his trust. Most of the recent text messages were mundane work colleagues checking in, appointment reminders, automated alerts from his bank about large transactions. Jennifer's thread was surprisingly empty, as if it had been deliberately cleared. But in an archived folder, I found a message that made my chest tighten. It wasn't to or from Mark, it had been screenshot and saved. The image showed a text conversation between Jennifer and someone named Alicia. Alicia, how much longer are you going to play housewife? Riviera awaits Jennifer. Might as well enjoy his money while I can. Doctor says he won't last long. Already started moving funds to my personal account. The timestamp was from 5 weeks ago. I closed the phone slowly, my hand trembling not from shock, but from a steady, simmering resolve. This wasn't just theft. This was calculated cruelty, documented in her own words, and I would make sure the world saw it. By sunset, I had compiled everything into a comprehensive file: bank statements, receipts, photographs, the notebook entries, and the damning text messages. Military precision in civilian warfare. Jennifer had declared war on my son, and she was about to learn that she'd made a grave tactical error she'd left me alive to fight back. I called Richard again, updating him on what I'd found. I need a good lawyer, I said. Someone who specializes in estate fraud. I know just the person, he replied. Edward Martinez, former JAG attorney, now in private practice, bulldog in the courtroom, especially when it comes to protecting veterans and their families. I wrote down the number, thanking him again. One more thing, Richard said before hanging up. Check Mark's life insurance policies. If he had any through his employer or privately, Jennifer's likely the beneficiary. We need to get ahead of that. The reminder jolted me. In the shock of Mark's death and the discovery of Jennifer's betrayal, I hadn't even thought about life insurance. The architectural firm where he'd worked as a senior designer would almost certainly have provided coverage as part of his benefits package. A quick search through his email confirmed it a policy worth $500,000 with Jennifer listed as the sole beneficiary. There was also a private policy he'd taken out 5 years ago before meeting Jennifer with me as the beneficiary. He'd never changed it. Small mercies in a storm of betrayal. My phone rang again, Jennifer's name flashing on the screen for the 12th time that day. This time, I answered. "Where is my money?" she demanded, skipping any pretense of grief or pleasantries. "Safe," I replied, my voice calm. "Away from you." "You can't do this," she hissed. "I'm his wife. I have rights, and I have power of attorney, granted long before you entered the picture." She laughed, the sound sharp and ugly. "That ended when he died. Colonel, Check your military regulations. I'm the widow. I inherit everything. The house, the cars, the bank account's all mine. We'll see about that, I said, then paused. Tell me something, Jennifer. Did you ever love him at all? Even for a moment, the question seemed to catch her off guard. For a second, her breathing was the only sound on the line. Love is for people who can't afford better options, she finally said. Mark was convenient and generous until he got sick. The callousness of her words should have shocked me, but after what I'd discovered, I was beyond surprise. You should know, I said carefully, that I found his phone. I've seen your text to Alicia. Her sharp intake of breath was the first genuine reaction I'd heard from her. Those are private, she snapped. You had no right. Neither did you. I cut her off. You had no right to steal from my son while he was dying alone. No right to marry him under false pretenses. No right to his money or his home or anything he worked for. You can't prove anything, she said, but uncertainty had crept into her voice. I was gathering evidence against insurgents before you were born, I told her, the steel of 40 years of military service threading through my words. Trust me when I say I have everything I need. I ended the call, setting the phone down carefully on Mark's desk. Through the window, I could see Mrs. Wilson's lights glowing warmly across the street, a reminder that not everyone in the world was like Jennifer. Tomorrow, I would call Edward Martinez and begin the legal battle. Tonight, I needed to plan Mark's funeral, a task I had never imagined facing. At least not so soon. A parent should never have to bury their child. The natural order of things had been upended, leaving me to navigate a terrain more treacherous than any battlefield I'd faced. In Mark's closet, I found a cardboard box labeled Mom's Things in his neat handwriting. Inside were items I'd asked him to store when I moved overseas for my last posting photo albums, my service medals, letters his father had written me during our early days together. At the bottom, wrapped in tissue paper, lay a small wooden frame holding a photograph of the three of us, Mark at 5 years old, balanced on his father's shoulders, me standing beside them, all of us laughing at something now lost to time. We'd been at the beach, the Gulf of Mexico stretching endlessly behind us. I held the photo to my chest, finally allowing the tears to come. Not in front of Jennifer, not in the hospital, not in Richard's office, but here, alone in the house my son had made, surrounded by the evidence of a life cut short and a love betrayed. Tomorrow would be for justice. Tonight was for grief. I woke before dawn, military habits refusing to yield even to grief. For a moment, the unfamiliar ceiling of Mark's guest room disoriented me. Then reality crashed back. My son was gone. His wife had betrayed him, and I had a war to fight on his behalf. The house was silent as I made coffee in the kitchen, the morning light barely filtering through the curtains. I'd slept in my clothes, too exhausted to bother with pajamas. My phone showed 3 missed calls from Jennifer, all after midnight. No voicemails this time. As I sipped my coffee, I methodically laid out my battle plan for the day: meet with the lawyer, arrange Mark's funeral, and continue gathering evidence. The military had taught me to compartmentalize, to focus on the mission even when emotions threatened to overwhelm. That training was saving me now. By 7, I was showered and dressed in the one civilian outfit I'd packed: dark slacks and a button-down shirt. I'd need to buy something appropriate for the funeral. The thought sent a fresh wave of pain through me, but I pushed it aside. Operational focus. Mrs. Wilson appeared at the door just as I was heading out, a covered dish in her hands. "Breakfast casserole," she said, pressing it into my arms before I could protest. "My mother's recipe. Thomas is coming by later to mow the lawn." Her eyes were red-rimmed beneath her glasses. "We all loved Mark, you know. Such a kind young man." I thanked her, touched by the simple gesture of neighborly care. In the military, we called it having your six, someone watching your back. I hadn't expected to find that in this civilian neighborhood. Edward Martinez's law office was in a converted historic home in downtown Naples, the kind of place that spoke of established success without flashy pretension. The receptionist, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, took my name and led me immediately to Martinez's office. "Colonel Grant," he said, rising from behind a desk stacked with legal volumes. Martinez was younger than I'd expected, perhaps in his early 40s, with close-cropped dark hair and the alert posture of someone with military training. "Richard Hayes speaks very highly of you." "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice," I replied, taking the seat he offered. "Richard explained the basics," Martinez said, his expression grave. "I'm sorry about your son. What you're describing, financial exploitation of a terminally ill spouse, is unfortunately something I've seen before." For the next hour, I walked him through everything I'd discovered, from the lavish spending while Mark was hospitalized to the damning text messages and the notebook entries. Martinez took meticulous notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "The power of attorney is crucial," he said, examining the document. "It gives us standing to take immediate action, but for long-term control of the estate, we'll need more." He outlined our options, filing for emergency injunctive relief to maintain the freeze on Mark's assets, contesting any attempt by Jennifer to claim the estate as sole heir, and potentially bringing civil charges for fraud. "What about criminal charges?" I asked. She essentially admitted to planning to drain his accounts while he was dying. Martinez's expression was measured. "Criminal fraud is harder to prove, especially in a marriage where finances are often commingled. But," he added, seeing my disappointment, "we can build that case parallel to the civil proceedings. I have contacts in the state attorney's office." By the end of the meeting, we had a clear strategy and a timeline. Martinez would file emergency papers that afternoon to maintain control of Mark's assets and begin the process of contesting Jennifer's claim as sole heir. "One more thing," he said as I stood to leave. "The life insurance through his employer Jennifer will likely try to claim that immediately. We should notify the company of potential fraud." I nodded, relieved that he'd thought of it. "What do you need from me?" "Continue gathering evidence," he said. "And prepare yourself. This type of case can get ugly, especially when significant assets are involved." Back at Mark's house, I found the lawn freshly mowed, the edges neatly trimmed. Thomas Wilson, a tall man in his 30s with his mother's kind eyes, was fixing the sagging gutter along the front of the house. "Mom said you could use a hand," he said simply when I thanked him. "Mark was good to me when we were kids. Least I can do." While Thomas worked outside, I returned to my investigation inside. The methodical search of Mark's home continued, now with more specific targets based on Martinez's advice. We needed to establish a timeline of when Jennifer's behavior changed, when the theft began, and how much had been taken. In the study closet, I found a fireproof safe, small but heavy. The combination eluded me until I tried my own birth date, a choice so like Mark that it made my throat tighten. Inside were his passport, social security card, and several USB drives labeled by year. I plugged the most recent into his laptop, which I'd managed to access using his standard password, a combination of his father's initials and the year he was born. Mark had always been sentimental about such things, a trait that now proved useful. The drive contained backup copies of his financial records, neatly organized by month and category. I opened the earliest files, dating back to just after his wedding to Jennifer. The transformation was stark and disturbing. Before Jennifer, Mark's spending had been modest and consistent, a good salary from the architectural firm, regular savings contributions, modest indulgences like occasional travel or restaurant meals. After the wedding, expenses skyrocketed. Jewelry, designer clothing, spa treatments, all categorized under Jennifer in his meticulous records. Most telling was a folder labeled Jen Background. I clicked it open, my breath catching at what I found. Mark had hired a private investigator 3 months ago. The report detailed Jennifer's history daughter of a once wealthy family that had lost everything in a financial scandal, a series of relationships with wealthy older men, and a pattern of excessive spending that had left her deeply in debt before meeting Mark. He had discovered her lies, but too late. A note at the end of the file, written by Mark himself, read confronted Jen about Aspen trip charges. She denied everything despite credit card statements. Says I'm paranoid, imagining things. Maybe the doctors are right about the stress affecting my mind. We'll talk to Dr. Chen about increasing medication. My hands clenched around the mouse. She'd not only stolen from him, but had made him doubt his own sanity while doing it a classic gaslighting technique I'd seen used in psychological warfare. The discovery hit me like a physical blow. Jennifer hadn't just married Mark for his money, she'd systematically manipulated him, exploiting his trusting nature while building her exit strategy. The notebook entries showing her lies about where money was going were just the tip of the iceberg. Digging deeper into the investigator's report, I found more disturbing details. Jennifer had been married twice before brief unions to wealthy men that had ended with substantial financial settlements. Both previous husbands were significantly older than her. One had died of heart failure shortly after their divorce. The other had moved abroad. She'd been planning this from the beginning, a calculated long con with my son as the target. I compiled everything onto a new USB drive for Martinez, copying the files methodically. The private investigator's contact information was included in the report. I made a note to call him. He might have additional evidence that hadn't made it into the final report. As evening approached, Thomas finished the outdoor repairs and declined my offer of payment. "Just helping a neighbor," he said with a shrug. "Mom says you're handling the funeral arrangements. If you need help with anything, just ask." I thanked him, grateful for the reminder of the practical matters still needing attention. After he left, I called the funeral home Dr. Reynolds had recommended and scheduled a meeting for the following morning. Mark would have a military honor guard his right as the son of 2 service members. His father would have wanted that. Just as I was closing the laptop, a new email arrived in Mark's inbox. The sender was Jennifer. The subject line reading simply, "You'll regret this." I opened it, bracing myself for more threats or accusations. Instead, I found a single line of text. "Check the basement storage room if you want to know what your precious son was really hiding." The message hit its mark, creating confusion and doubt, exactly as she'd intended. Mark's house didn't have a basement. Or did it? The architectural plans I'd seen made no mention of one, but Florida homes sometimes had small storage areas built below ground level despite the water table challenges. I searched the house again, this time looking for any door or access point I might have missed. In the utility room off the kitchen, behind a stack of moving boxes, I found a small door that might have been mistaken for an electrical panel. It opened to reveal a set of narrow stairs leading down into darkness. The light switch revealed a small room, perhaps 10 by 12 feet, with concrete walls and a dehumidifier running in one corner. Metal shelving units lined the walls, holding Christmas decorations, old college textbooks, and boxes labeled with years. Nothing suspicious or secret. Until I noticed the corner where the concrete floor had been recently disturbed, a section slightly different in color, as if it had been patched. Military training kicked in. I'd seen enough hidden caches and combat zones to recognize the signs. Using a screwdriver from Mark's toolbox, I pried at the edges of the patched section. The concrete came away easily, revealing a small metal box embedded in the floor. Inside was a USB drive, different from the others I'd found, and a handwritten note in Mark's distinctive script. "Mom, if you're reading this, something has happened to me. Everything you need is here. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I wanted to handle it myself. I love you. Mark." My hands trembled as I took the drive upstairs. Whatever Jennifer thought Mark was hiding, he had been one step ahead of her, and he had trusted me to find it. The drive contained a video file, dated just 3 weeks ago, I clicked play, and Mark's face filled the screen. He looked gaunt, his skin sallow, his eyes shadowed with pain and exhaustion. "Hi, Mom," he began, his voice raspier than I remembered. "If you're watching this, then things have gone badly. I've been sick for a while now, stomach pain that wouldn't go away. The doctors finally figured it out last month. Stage 4 gastric cancer with metastasis. Not much they can do." He paused, taking a sip of water, wincing with the effort. "I should have told you, but you were finishing your final deployment. I didn't want you to worry or try to come home early." Stupid pride, I guess. He attempted a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "There's something else you need to know. Jennifer," he sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "She's not who I thought she was. I found out she's been stealing from me, hiding money in offshore accounts. When I confronted her about the doctor's diagnosis, his voice broke. She asked how long I had left and if my life insurance was paid up. The raw pain in his eyes made my chest constrict. I've gathered evidence," he continued, stronger now. "Account numbers, transfer records, recordings of conversations, it's all on this drive. I've made provisions to protect what I can. But Jennifer is resourceful. She thinks I don't know about her plan. But the investigator I hired found everything." He leaned closer to the camera, his eyes suddenly fierce despite his weakened state. "Mom, I know you'll do what needs to be done. You always have. I've updated my will, but I had to do it carefully so Jennifer wouldn't find out. The lawyer's information is in the file named Gibraltar. Contact him as soon as possible." Mark looked away briefly, composing himself. When he turned back, his expression had softened. "I want you to know I was happy. Once. And I've made peace with what's happening. Please don't blame yourself for not being here. You've always been there when it mattered." His voice caught. "I love you, Mom. Always have." The video ended, freezing on Mark's face my son, my only child, saying goodbye through a computer screen while I was half a world away. I sat motionless for several minutes, the pain so intense it felt physical. Then, drawing on decades of discipline, I dried my eyes and opened the file labeled Gibraltar. Inside was contact information for a lawyer in Miami, not Mark's regular attorney, but a specialist in estate fraud and asset protection. Also included were account numbers for several trusts Mark had established, routing information for wire transfers Jennifer had made to offshore accounts, and recorded conversations between them where she all but admitted her intentions. The most damning piece of evidence was an audio recording from what must have been hidden devices in their home. Jennifer's voice was unmistakable. "I don't care what the doctor said. If you'd gone for testing when I told you to, maybe they could have done something. Now it's too late, and I'm stuck watching you die slowly when I could be enjoying myself." Mark's voice, weak but steady. "Is that all I am to you?" "A bank account." Jennifer's laugh was cold. "Don't be dramatic. You were fun for a while, but let's be honest. I married you for financial security. And now I have to wait around while you waste away. It's not fair." "You could leave," Mark suggested quietly, "and lose my claim to everything. Not a chance. I've worked too hard for this. Your mother's going to be so surprised when she finds out her perfect son didn't leave her a penny." The recording continued, capturing Jennifer on the phone with someone named Alicia. "Might as well enjoy his money while I can. Doctor says he won't last long. I've already started moving funds to my personal account." I sat back, my military training the only thing keeping me from throwing the laptop across the room. The evidence was overwhelming and exactly what Martinez needed to build an airtight case. I called him immediately, despite the late hour. "I found something you need to see," I said when he answered. Mark left a hidden cache of evidence against Jennifer. "I'll come to you," he replied without hesitation. "This changes everything." While waiting for Martinez, I made one more discovery in Mark's files, a revised will, properly notarized and dated just 2 weeks before his hospitalization. In it, he left specific instructions Jennifer was to receive only what was legally required as his spouse, the minimum the law demanded. The bulk of his estate would go to a trust, with me as executor, designated for charitable purposes, and to establish a scholarship for young architects from underprivileged backgrounds. My son, even while dying and betrayed, had thought of others. When Martinez arrived an hour later, I played the video and the recordings for him, then showed him the financial records and the will. "This is extraordinary," he said, reviewing the documents. Mark was thorough military precision. "He was a military brat," I said, the term carrying all the pride of our community. "He learned to be prepared." Martinez nodded, understanding the code. "With this evidence, we're not just playing defense anymore. We can go after Jennifer for fraud, theft, and potentially elder abuse given Mark's incapacitated state during his illness." Elder abuse, I questioned. Mark was only 35. In Florida law, abuse of a disabled adult follows similar statutes, Martinez explained. Mark's terminal condition made him vulnerable. Jennifer exploited that vulnerability systematically. He gathered the files, promising to begin proceedings immediately. "The hearing for emergency control of the estate is tomorrow at 10. Be prepared for Jennifer to fight dirty. People like her always do when cornered." After he left, I sat alone in Mark's study, surrounded by the evidence of his final battle one fought in silence while I was deployed overseas. The guilt was crushing, but beneath it burned a steady flame of resolve. Jennifer had declared war on my son. Now she would face his mother, a combat veteran with nothing left to lose. Morning brought a fresh wave of determination. I dressed carefully in the navy blue suit I'd purchased the previous day, not quite military formal, but structured and authoritative. The weight of Mark's evidence USB drive in my pocket felt like ammunition. The courthouse was a 30-minute drive from Mark's house, a modern building of glass and concrete that seemed too cold for the human dramas unfolding inside. Martinez met me at the entrance, his briefcase bulging with the files I'd provided. "Jennifer's here already," he warned as we walked through security. "With counsel Gregory Pearson, high-priced divorce attorney known for aggressive tactics." I nodded, unsurprised. "We have the truth on our side." Martinez's slight smile acknowledged my faith while tempering it with realism. "In court, truth needs evidence and legal standing. We have both, but don't underestimate them." The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, with polished wooden benches and the Florida state seal mounted behind the judge's bench. Jennifer sat in the front row on the opposite side, wearing a black dress that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, her expression one of practiced grief. Beside her sat a man in his 50s, silver-haired and expensively dressed, leaning close to whisper in her ear. When she saw me, her eyes narrowed briefly before she composed her features into a mask of sorrow. The performance was flawless, the grieving widow facing her hostile mother-in-law. Judge Eleanor Winters entered, a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and shrewd eyes that seemed to assess the entire room in one glance. Everyone rose, then sat at her command. "Case number 2025 CF4872 in the matter of the estate of Mark Grant," the clerk announced. "Emergency petition for control of estate assets." Martinez stood. "Edward Martinez representing Colonel Shirley Grant, mother of the deceased and holder of durable power of attorney." Pearson rose next. "Gregory Pearson for Jennifer Grant, widow of the deceased and legal heir." Judge Winters reviewed the documents before her, then looked up. "Mr. Martinez, you're seeking to freeze all estate assets and transfer control to Colonel Grant based on alleged misappropriation of funds. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor. We have substantial evidence of systematic financial exploitation of the deceased during his terminal illness." Pearson interjected immediately. "Your Honor, this is nothing but a grieving mother's attempt to disinherit her son's legal wife." The power of attorney Colonel Grant claims to hold was superseded by Mr. Grant's death. The judge held up a hand. I'll hear arguments from both sides. Mr. Martinez, proceed. For the next 40 minutes, Martinez methodically presented our case. The financial records showing Jennifer's extravagant spending while Mark was hospitalized. The private investigator's report revealing her pattern of targeting wealthy men. The recorded conversations demonstrating her true motives. Throughout the presentation, I kept my eyes forward, my posture military straight. Only once did I glance at Jennifer, finding her mask of grief slipping into cold calculation as she whispered urgently to Pearson. When Martinez played the recording of Jennifer discussing how she'd already started moving funds while Mark was dying, a murmur ran through the courtroom. Judge Winters's expression remained neutral, but her eyes sharpened. Pearson's rebuttal was what we'd expected, attacking the legality of the recordings, questioning the authenticity of the evidence, portraying Jennifer as a loving wife blindsided by both her husband's death and her mother-in-law's hostility. Mrs. Grant had every right to access joint accounts, he argued smoothly. These were marital assets. Colonel Grant is attempting to rewrite Florida law based on personal animosity. The judge listened impassively, occasionally making notes. When both attorneys had finished, she turned to me. Colonel Grant, as holder of the power of attorney, what are your intentions regarding the estate? I stood drawing on 4 decades of addressing superior officers. Your Honor, my son's final wishes were clear. He established trusts for charitable purposes and made provisions for his assets to benefit architectural education for underprivileged students. I intend to honor those wishes and protect his legacy from further exploitation. Judge Winters nodded, then addressed Jennifer. Mrs. Grant, do you wish to make a statement? Jennifer rose, a single tear tracking perfectly down her cheek. Your Honor, I loved my husband. These accusations are heartbreaking at a time when I'm already grieving. Mark would be devastated to see his mother turning against me like this. Her performance was convincing, but the evidence spoke louder. Judge Winters reviewed her notes one final time, then looked up. Based on the evidence presented and the existence of a valid power of attorney, the court grants temporary control of all estate assets to Colonel Shirley Grant, pending full probate proceedings. All accounts will remain frozen except as necessary for estate administration. Mrs. Jennifer Grant is prohibited from accessing any property or funds until further order. The sound of the gavel was sharp and final. Jennifer shot to her feet, her facade of grief evaporating instantly. You can't do this, she shouted, her face flushed with rage. That money is mine. The house is mine. Control yourself, Mrs. Grant, Judge Winters warned, or I'll hold you in contempt. Jennifer turned to me, her eyes burning with hatred. You'll regret this, surely. I knew people in Mark's life you've never even met. This isn't over. 2 bailiffs moved closer as Pearson attempted to calm his client. Martinez gathered our materials quickly, guiding me toward the exit before the situation escalated further. In the hallway, he allowed himself a small smile. Round 1 to us. But Jennifer's right about one thing, this isn't over. Pearson will appeal, and they'll look for any procedural error they can find. I nodded, the victory feeling hollow without Mark there to see justice being served. What's our next step? We need to secure the house and all physical assets immediately. Change the locks. Document everything of value. Jennifer will likely try to remove items she claims are personal property. By the time we returned to Mark's house, it was already too late for some of that. The front door stood open, and sounds of destruction came from inside. Martinez called the police while I rushed in to find Jennifer and 2 men I didn't recognize throwing items into boxes and bags. The living room was in chaos, drawers emptied onto the floor, cabinets standing open, Mark's belongings scattered everywhere. Jennifer looked up as I entered, a framed photo of Mark in her hands. The grieving mother returns, she sneered, deliberately dropping the frame. The glass shattered on the hardwood floor. Mark's smiling face now webbed with cracks. "Just collecting my things." "Step away from my son's belongings," I said, my voice deadly calm, the tone that had made recruits freeze in their tracks. Jennifer laughed. "Your son, you were barely in his life. Did you know he waited by the phone every birthday, hoping you'd call, that he kept making excuses for why his mother was always too busy for him?" The words were calculated to wound, and they found their mark. But 40 years of military discipline doesn't break easily. "The police are on their way," I replied evenly. "And you're trespassing on property you've been legally barred from entering." One of the men with her young, muscular, with a tattoo visible at his collar, stepped forward menacingly. "Lady, you should leave before things get unpleasant." Martinez appeared behind me, his phone still in hand. "That sounds very much like a threat, which would violate the restraining order included in the judge's ruling. The police are 3 minutes out. I suggest you all stop what you're doing immediately." The man hesitated, looking to Jennifer for direction, her face contorted with fury, but calculation quickly replaced it. "Fine," she said, dropping an expensive-looking vase that shattered alongside the photo frame. "Take this dump." Mark was pathetic anyway, weak, just like his father probably was. "You military types are all the same, all discipline. No spine." She stalked toward the door, pausing beside me. "This house, it's mortgaged to the hilt." "I made sure of that." "Good luck paying it off on your pension." "Colonel?" The 2 men followed her out, carrying several bags of items. We let them go, Martinez documenting everything with his phone camera. The destruction they'd left behind was extensive but appeared targeted expensive electronics. Jewelry and artwork were gone, while more personal items had been deliberately damaged. The police arrived minutes later, taking statements and photographing the scene. The officer in charge, a veteran himself based on the service pin on his uniform, was sympathetic. "We'll file charges for violating the court order and destruction of property," he assured me. "But recovering whatever they took might be difficult." After they left, Martinez helped me secure the house, calling a locksmith to change all the locks and arranging for a security service to monitor the property. By evening, the immediate crisis had been contained, but the emotional toll was mounting. "You should get some rest," Martinez advised as he prepared to leave. "Tomorrow we'll need to visit Mark's bank in person, check safe deposit boxes, and begin a full inventory of the estate." I nodded, too exhausted to speak. The adrenaline of the confrontation was fading, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness. "You won," he added gently. "Today was a major victory. Mark would be proud." Alone in the house, I began cleaning up the mess Jennifer had left behind, carefully collecting the shards of broken glass from Mark's photo. The image of my son, smiling up through the cracks, brought a fresh wave of grief. Had I really missed all those birthdays? Had he really waited by the phone? Jennifer's words, designed to hurt, carried just enough potential truth to find purchase. My military career had taken me away from Mark more often than I cared to admit. There had been missed birthdays, school events I couldn't attend, graduations I'd witnessed only through photos or video calls. But we'd had our own language of love, the care packages I sent from every deployment, the long letters I wrote by hand, the way he always signed off our calls with "proud of you, Mom." We'd understood each other's commitments and sacrifices, hadn't we? As I carefully placed the broken frame on the mantel, my phone rang. Richard Hayes calling for an update. "We won the emergency hearing," I told him, fighting to keep my voice steady. But Jennifer ransacked the house before we could secure it. Richard's sigh carried through the line. "Not surprised. People like that always lash out when cornered, but this gives us more ammunition for the criminal case." "She said the house is heavily mortgaged," I added. "Is that something you can check?" "Already on it," he replied. "I've been digging into all the financial records we can legally access. Mark's main mortgage was reasonable given his income, But there's a second mortgage taken out 8 months ago, nearly $200,000. Jennifer's signature is on it too. The news wasn't surprising after everything else I'd discovered, but it still stung. Where did the money go? That's the interesting part, Richard said, his tone shifting to the one he used when reporting intelligence findings. It was wire transferred to an account in the Cayman Islands, then disappeared into a network of shell companies. Classic money laundering pattern. Can we trace it? With the right resources. There was a pause. Surely, this goes beyond simple fraud. This looks like organized criminal activity. Jennifer may be connected to something bigger than a simple con. The implication hung in the air between us. If Jennifer was part of a larger criminal enterprise specializing in targeting and defrauding vulnerable individuals, we weren't just fighting one woman, we were potentially taking on a dangerous organization. I need to make some calls, Richard continued. I still have contacts in financial crimes enforcement. This might be a case that they're already aware of. After we hung up, I sat in Mark's living room, surrounded by the chaos of Jennifer's destruction, and felt a strange calm settle over me. The mission parameters had changed, but the objective remained the same justice for Mark. If Jennifer was part of something larger, then bringing her down might protect other potential victims. The fight had just expanded beyond my son's estate to something that drew on all my military training and experience. Tomorrow would bring new battles on multiple fronts: the bank, the funeral arrangements, the ongoing legal proceedings. But tonight, I allowed myself a moment of grim satisfaction. Jennifer had underestimated me, mistaking my military discipline for weakness, my focus for narrowness. She was about to learn what every adversary I'd faced in 40 years of service had discovered: I don't start fights, but I always finish them. The funeral home was quiet as I finalized arrangements for Mark's service. The director, a compassionate woman named Sarah Daniels, guided me through options with gentle efficiency. Military honors were confirmed: a flag ceremony befitting the son of 2 decorated service members. We have an opening this Saturday, she said, checking her calendar. Would that work for you, Colonel Grant? I nodded, imagining the chairs filled with people who had known and loved my son. But who would those people be? My military career had kept me at a distance from Mark's adult life. I knew his colleagues' names from our conversations, but little about his friendships, his community. As if reading my thoughts, Sarah spoke again. We usually create a memory board with photographs. If you'd like, we can put a notice in the local paper as well, with service details. Yes, please, I agreed, grateful for her guidance. And, I hesitated, then continued. Could you recommend a good florist? I want to make sure there are enough flowers. Mark loved gardenias. They were his father's favorite. Her smile was kind. We can handle that for you. And don't worry about attendance. From what I've already heard around town, your son was well respected and well liked. After finishing at the funeral home, I drove to Naples Community Bank, where Mark had his primary accounts and, according to his records, a safe deposit box. The bank manager, alerted by Martinez about the court order, met me in the lobby. Colonel Grant, I'm Michael Fernandez, he said, shaking my hand firmly. We have everything prepared for your visit. If you'll follow me. In his office, Fernandez brought out the paperwork Martinez had sent over the court order granting me temporary control of Mark's estate and the power of attorney documentation. I want to express my condolences, Fernandez said as he reviewed the documents. Mark was a valued client. I helped him set up his accounts when he first moved to Naples. Thank you, I replied. Did you happen to know him well? Fernandez's expression softened. He came in regularly, always took time to ask about my family. When my son was interested in architecture, Mark spent an hour showing him how to sketch perspective drawings right here in the lobby. That's the kind of man he was. The simple anecdote, this small glimpse into my son's everyday kindness, tightened my throat. I'd known Mark was generous and thoughtful, but hearing it from others made his loss feel both sharper and somehow more bearable, as if pieces of him continued to exist in the memories of those he'd touched. Fernandez escorted me to the safe deposit box area, where a bank officer waited with the necessary forms. The box, when opened, contained what I'd expected: Mark's original birth certificate, his father's service medals, the deed to the house, and several sealed envelopes. One envelope bore my name in Mark's handwriting. Inside was a letter dated just 3 weeks before his hospitalization. "Mom, if you're reading this, things have gone the way the doctors predicted. I'm sorry for not telling you about the diagnosis sooner. I kept hoping for better news to share instead. There's something else I couldn't bring myself to tell you over the phone. Jennifer isn't who we thought she was. I discovered she's been systematically stealing from me, using my accounts to fund a lifestyle I never knew about. When I confronted her, she didn't even deny it, just laughed and said it was too late for me to do anything about it. I've gathered evidence. You'll find it in the hidden storage room at the house, behind the utility room. I've also revised my will with Mr. Drake contact info enclosed to protect what I can. The trust for the architectural scholarship is secure. She can't touch that. I need you to know that despite everything, I've had a good life. Your strength has always been my foundation. The way you carried on after Dad died showed me what real courage looks like. I'm trying to face this with the same dignity. There's one more thing. If things go badly with Jennifer, and I suspect they will, please look into the Foster Architecture Mentorship Program. I've been volunteering there for the past 2 years, working with kids who remind me so much of myself at that age. They're good kids who just need someone to believe in them. I love you. Mom, always have, always will. Mark. I folded the letter carefully, placing it in my jacket pocket. The bank officer pretended not to notice the tears I quickly wiped away. Mark's final communication, his last wishes, so practical yet so deeply personal. Even dying, he'd thought of others, creating a path for me to follow after he was gone. The rest of the envelopes contained what he'd promised: contact information for his will executor, documentation for the Architectural Scholarship Trust, and financial records that further confirmed Jennifer's systematic theft. Back in Fernandez's office, I inquired about recent transactions on Mark's accounts before the court-ordered freeze. There was significant activity in the weeks before his hospitalization, Fernandez confirmed, pulling up the records on his computer. Large withdrawals, wire transfers to accounts we couldn't trace. We actually flagged it for potential fraud, but when we called, Mrs. Grant assured us the transactions were authorized. And you accepted that? I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. Fernandez looked uncomfortable. She had joint access to the accounts, Colonel, and she provided verification information. Legally, our hands were tied. He hesitated, then added more quietly, "For what it's worth, I never trusted her." Something about the way she spoke about Mark's money as if it was already hers. By the time I left the bank, I had a clearer picture of Jennifer's financial maneuvers, and it was even worse than I'd feared. Over the past 6 months, she'd systematically drained nearly $400,000 from Mark's accounts through a combination of direct withdrawals, wire transfers, and credit card charges. Martinez met me at a small cafe near his office, his expression serious as I shared what I'd learned. "This strengthens our case," he said, reviewing the bank records. "But Jennifer's attorney filed an emergency appeal this morning, claiming the evidence was obtained illegally and that Mark was not of sound mind when he revised his will." "That's absurd," I countered. "Mark was fully competent until the final days. We'll need his doctors to testify to that effect," Martinez agreed. "I've already contacted Dr. Reynolds. The hearing is set for next week, which gives us time to prepare." As we discussed strategy, my phone rang a number I didn't recognize. I excused myself to answer. "Colonel Grant, this is Detective James Morales, Naples Police Department, Financial Crimes Unit. We need to speak with you regarding Jennifer Grant." An hour later, I sat across from Detective Morales in an interview room at the police station. He was a compact man with intelligent eyes and the focused demeanor of someone who'd seen too many scams to be surprised by human greed. Your son may not have been the first victim, Morales explained, opening a file folder. We've been tracking a pattern of similar cases across Florida wealthy individuals, often with health issues, who marry partners who then systematically drain their assets. He laid out photographs of 3 women all bearing striking resemblances to Jennifer, though with different hair colors and styles. Facial recognition software flagged Mrs. Grant from the report your attorney filed. We believe she's part of an organized group that targets vulnerable individuals with significant assets. Organized crime, I asked, thinking of Richard's warning. More like a sophisticated con operation. Morales clarified. They identify targets, research their financials, and insert an operative, usually a woman, for male targets, occasionally men for female marks. The operative establishes a relationship, pushes for marriage to gain legal access to assets, then begins the systematic extraction of funds. The clinical description made my skin crawl. My son, reduced to a target in some predatory scheme. What happens to the victims? I asked, though I feared I knew the answer. Morales's expression was grim. In most cases, the victim dies sometimes from their existing health condition, sometimes under circumstances that raise questions but can't be definitively ruled suspicious. Are you saying Jennifer might have... I couldn't finish the sentence. We don't have evidence of that in Mark's case, Morales said carefully, but we're requesting his medical records and will be reviewing them closely. Cancer creates a convenient cover if someone were to, say, withhold medication or interfere with treatment. It would be difficult to prove. The possibility that Jennifer might have accelerated Mark's decline, might have deliberately ensured he wouldn't recover, sent ice through my veins. I thought of the prescription bottles in his bathroom, some nearly full when they should have been empty if he'd been taking his medication properly. I want to help, I said. My voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Whatever you need. We need access to your son's home to search for additional evidence, and we'd like you to continue your civil case. It keeps Jennifer occupied while we build our criminal investigation. I nodded. Military training taking over. Consider it done. When I returned to Mark's house that evening, it felt different, no longer just the site of personal grief, but now part of a larger battlefield. I moved through the rooms methodically, seeing potential evidence where before I'd only seen memories. The prescription bottles in the bathroom had Jennifer been replacing medication with placebos. The food in the refrigerator, had she been doing something to it? The sudden weight loss Mark had mentioned in our last video call, was it only the cancer? Or something more sinister? I was examining the prescription bottles more closely when a knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. Through the peephole, I saw Jennifer standing on the porch, alone this time and dressed more casually than in court. Against my better judgment, I opened the door, keeping the security chain engaged. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice cold. "To talk," she replied, her tone conciliatory. "Just 5 minutes. Shirley, we're both grieving Mark. This fighting isn't what he would have wanted." The performance was flawless, the slight tremor in her voice, the redness around her eyes suggesting recent tears, the way she hugged herself as if for comfort. If I hadn't seen the evidence, hadn't heard her own words on those recordings, I might have believed her. "You have exactly 3 minutes, I said, releasing the chain but blocking the entrance. "Speak from there." Jennifer's mask slipped for just a second, a flash of annoyance quickly covered with a sorrowful smile. "I know you think I took advantage of Mark, but it wasn't like that. We loved each other. Yes, I spent money, probably too much, but that was our arrangement. He enjoyed seeing me happy. Is that why you were on a yacht while he was dying alone in the ICU? I asked, keeping my voice even. She had an answer ready. Mark insisted I go. He didn't want me to see him suffering. I was honoring his wishes. Her eyes welled with tears on cue. The last thing he said to me was, "Live your life, Jen. Be happy." The audacity of the lie might have worked on someone else, someone who hadn't seen the evidence, who hadn't read Mark's final letter, who hadn't heard the recordings of her true feelings. But instead of anger, I felt a strange clarity. Jennifer wasn't just a greedy woman who'd married for money. She was a professional predator, skilled at manipulation and deception. And suddenly, I saw the opportunity. "You know, Jennifer," I said, softening my tone slightly, "I've been thinking about what Mark would want. Maybe you're right, all this fighting isn't helping anyone." She blinked, clearly not expecting this response. "Exactly. We could settle this privately, without lawyers. I'm sure we can come to an arrangement that honors Mark's memory." I nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe so. Why don't you come by tomorrow afternoon? We can discuss terms, just the two of us." The flash of triumph in her eyes confirmed what I suspected. She thought she'd found a weakness to exploit. "I'd like that," she said, reaching out as if to touch my arm. I stepped back instinctively, and she recovered smoothly. "Around 2? Perfect," I agreed, already calculating how to set the trap. As soon as she left, I called Detective Morales. "Jennifer just approached me, trying to negotiate privately. I've set a meeting for tomorrow afternoon." "Don't meet with her alone," he warned immediately. "I wasn't planning to," I assured him. "But this might be our chance to get her to incriminate herself. If we wire the house—" There was a pause as Morales considered. "It's risky, but it could work. I'll bring a team in the morning to set up surveillance. If she makes any admissions about the scheme or Mark's treatment, we'll have her." The next morning passed in a flurry of activity as police technicians discreetly placed recording devices throughout Mark's living room and kitchen. Detective Morales briefed me on how to direct the conversation without tipping Jennifer off. "Let her think you're vulnerable, grieving, overwhelmed, looking for an easy solution," he advised. "People like her prey on perceived weakness. She'll try to establish a personal connection, position herself as sympathetic to your loss while suggesting her solution is the only reasonable option." I nodded, familiar with the tactics from hostage negotiation training. "And what's my objective? Get her talking about the money, where it went, how much she took. If possible, steer the conversation toward Mark's medical care. We need her to admit to either financial exploitation or medical neglect, preferably both." At precisely 2:00, Jennifer arrived, carrying a small gift bag and wearing an expression of practiced sympathy. I invited her in, noting how her eyes scanned the room not in grief, but in assessment, cataloging valuable items. "I brought you something," she said, offering the bag. Inside was a framed photo of Mark, the same one she'd deliberately smashed during her rampage through the house, now in a new frame. "I felt terrible about what happened to this," she explained, watching my reaction closely. "Mark loved this picture. The manipulation was so transparent it would have been laughable if not for the stakes." I placed the photo on the coffee table, murmuring appropriate thanks. "Can I get you something to drink?" I offered, following the script Morales had suggested. "Tea, perhaps." "That would be lovely," Jennifer replied, settling onto the couch as if she still belonged there. In the kitchen, I took a moment to compose myself, remembering my role. When I returned with 2 cups of tea, Jennifer had already moved to Mark's desk, casually examining papers I'd deliberately left visible bank statements showing significant remaining assets. "So much paperwork after someone passes," she commented, returning to the couch. "It's overwhelming, isn't it?" "Completely," I agreed, injecting weariness into my voice. "The legalities, the financial matters. I'm a soldier, not an accountant." Jennifer's smile was predatory, though she clearly thought it sympathetic. "That's why I thought we should talk privately. All these lawyers and courts, they just complicate things. Mark would have hated seeing his money wasted on legal fees." I nodded, encouraging her to continue. "I'm thinking we could settle this simply," she went on, leaning forward confidentially. "You keep some sentimental items. I maintain the lifestyle Mark wanted me to have, and we both move on with our lives. No prolonged court battle. No messy public fight. What exactly did you have in mind? I asked, playing the role of someone considering capitulation. Jennifer's proposal was breathtaking in its audacity. She would take the house, the investment accounts, and Mark's life insurance, while I would receive some personal effects and a generous one-time payment of $50,000. That seems uneven, I said carefully, feigning confusion rather than outrage. Mark and I were building a life together, she explained smoothly. Everything we had was meant for our future. He'd want me to be taken care of. She sighed, a practiced sound of resignation. The truth is, Shirley, Mark knew he was sick for months before he told anyone. He could have gotten treatment earlier, but he refused. By the time he finally saw specialists, it was too late. The implication was clear. She was suggesting Mark had been suicidal or negligent about his health, attempting to undermine the medical negligence angle the police were investigating. That doesn't sound like my son, I said, allowing genuine emotion to color my words. Jennifer's expression hardened slightly. You weren't here. You were off playing soldier while he was dealing with this alone. She quickly softened again. I'm sorry. That was unfair. We're both grieving. But Mark made his choices, and now we have to respect them, including his choice to leave the bulk of his estate to charity, I asked. Watching her reaction, her smile froze. That document was created when he was heavily medicated, barely coherent. His real wishes were for me to be taken care of. He told me so many times. And the recordings where you discussed spending his money while he was dying. Were those his wishes too? Jennifer's facade cracked completely. Those recordings are fake. You set me up, turned Mark against me at the end. So you're saying Mark wasn't of sound mind when he made those recordings? When exactly did his mental capacity become compromised? Jennifer, before or after you started moving his money offshore? She stood abruptly. Tea forgotten. This was a mistake. I tried to be reasonable, to offer you a dignified way out. But if you want a war, Colonel, you'll get one. It's already begun, I replied calmly. The police are very interested in your previous identities, and the other men who died after marrying you. The color drained from Jennifer's face. You're bluffing. Detective Morales sends his regards. He's particularly interested in your connection to a certain operation targeting wealthy, ill individuals across Florida. For a moment, raw panic flashed across her features. Then, with remarkable control, she composed herself. Prove it, she said coldly. You have nothing but circumstantial evidence and a mother's desperate grief. My lawyer will destroy you in court. Perhaps, I conceded. But the FBI doesn't need to prove everything in court to freeze assets connected to organized crime. Those offshore accounts you've been filling already flagged. It was a calculated bluff based on information Richard had shared, but Jennifer's reaction confirmed its accuracy. This isn't over, she hissed, gathering her purse. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Actually, I replied, rising to show her out. I think I do. You're not the first predator I've encountered, Jennifer, just the first who made the mistake of targeting my family. After she stormed out, Detective Morales emerged from the back bedroom where he'd been monitoring the conversation. We got it, he said, satisfaction evident in his voice. Her reaction to the offshore accounts, the implied threats combined with the financial evidence. It's enough for an arrest warrant. For financial crimes, I clarified. Not for what she might have done to hasten Mark's death. Morales nodded grimly. One step at a time. Financial crimes will get us in the door. Once we have her in custody, we can dig deeper into the medical aspects. The machinery of justice began moving quickly after that. Jennifer was arrested the following morning on charges of grand theft, fraud, and exploitation of a vulnerable adult. The search of her hotel room yielded multiple phones, identification documents under different names, and a laptop containing evidence linking her to similar schemes in other states. The news coverage was immediate and extensive. By afternoon, Martinez called to inform me that Jennifer's attorney had withdrawn from the civil case, citing irreconcilable differences with the client. "We've essentially won by default," Martinez explained. "With Jennifer in custody and facing criminal charges, no reputable attorney will touch her appeal. The civil court will almost certainly confirm your control of Mark's estate permanently." It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt hollow, a battle won too late to save what mattered most. 3 days later, Mark's funeral service filled the small chapel at Naples Memorial Gardens. To my surprise and deep gratitude, the pews were crowded colleagues from his architectural firm, neighbors, clients whose homes he had designed, and, most unexpectedly, a group of teenagers seated together near the front, each wearing a small pin shaped like a drafting compass. Mrs. Wilson sat beside me in the front row, her quiet presence a comfort as the military honor guard presented the folded flag on behalf of a grateful nation. The simple words, spoken so often at military funerals, took on new meaning as I accepted the triangle of blue and white on behalf of my son. After the service, as attendees gathered for the reception, a tall black man in his 40s approached me. He wore the same compass pin I'd noticed on the teenagers. "Colonel Grant, I'm David Foster. I ran the architecture mentorship program Mark was involved with." He gestured toward the teens. "These are some of his students. They asked to come pay their respects." The Foster Architecture Mentorship Program, the organization Mark had mentioned in his final letter. I'd been so consumed with Jennifer and the legal battles that I hadn't yet followed up on his request to look into it. "Thank you for coming," he said, genuinely moved. "Mark mentioned your program. He seemed to care deeply about it." Foster nodded, his expression warm. "Mark was our most dedicated mentor. He worked with these kids twice a week, sometimes more. When they heard about his passing, they were devastated." One by one, the teenagers came forward to offer condolences, each sharing brief stories about Mark's influence on their lives. A girl named Maya, no more than 16, showed me a sketch of a sustainable housing design Mark had helped her develop. A boy called Jamal described how Mark had arranged for him to shadow professionals at his firm during school breaks. "He believed in us," Maya said simply. "When everyone else saw kids from the wrong side of town, he saw future architects." Foster handed me a card. "When you're ready, Colonel, we'd love to talk with you about continuing Mark's legacy with the program. No pressure, of course. Just an open invitation." I tucked the card into my pocket, thanking him sincerely. For the first time since arriving in Naples, I felt a genuine connection to the life Mark had built here, not just the physical assets Jennifer had coveted, but the meaningful relationships and positive impact he'd created. The weeks following the funeral brought a gradual shift in focus, with Jennifer in custody awaiting trial and the civil matters largely resolved. I found myself at a crossroads. My retirement plan had been vague, perhaps travel, reconnect with old military friends, maybe write the memoir my former commanding officer had been encouraging me to tackle. Now, those plans felt empty, disconnected from what mattered. I'd come to Naples to surprise my son and instead found myself executor of his estate, caretaker of his legacy, an unexpected warrior in a battle against those who had exploited him. One morning, unable to sleep past dawn despite having no specific duties to attend to, I found myself driving to the address on David Foster's card. The Foster Architecture Mentorship Program operated from a renovated warehouse in a transitional neighborhood, an impressive space with high ceilings, abundant natural light, and walls covered with architectural drawings, models, and photographs. Foster seemed unsurprised to see me. "I had a feeling you might stop by," he said, offering coffee as he showed me around the facility. "Mark talked about you often said his attention to detail and work ethic came from you." The tour revealed drawing tables where students worked on designs, a small computer lab with architectural software, a workshop for building models, and a gallery space displaying student projects. Throughout the building, photographs documented field trips to significant architectural sites and mentoring sessions with professionals. Mark appeared in many of these images instructing teens at drawing tables, examining models with focused attention, laughing with students during what appeared to be a pizza party celebration. "How did Mark get involved?" I asked, studying a photograph of my son helping a young man adjust a blueprint. "He volunteered after designing a community center in this neighborhood," Foster explained. "Said he wanted to do more than just create buildings, he wanted to create opportunities for the kids who'd use them." That sounded like Mark always seeing beyond the immediate task to the human impact of his work. "We're actually facing a challenge," Foster continued as we returned to his office. "The building owner is selling, and our lease ends in 3 months. Mark was helping us look for new space and had started designing renovations for a potential location. I remembered the sketches I'd found in Mark's home office preliminary designs for a space similar to this one, but with expanded facilities. He'd labeled the project Foster 2.0 in his neat architectural handwriting. Mark mentioned in his final letter that he wanted me to look into your program," I said. "I think he saw it as important unfinished business." Foster nodded, his expression both sad and determined. "We talked about it during his last visit, when he was already quite ill. He was concerned about the program continuing without him." An idea began forming, nebulous at first, then increasingly clear. Mark established a trust for architectural education before he died. I'm the executor. Perhaps there's a way to honor his wishes that helps your program continue. The meeting with the trust attorneys later that week crystallized the path forward. Mark's educational trust could be directed to establish a permanent home for the Foster Architecture Mentorship Program, creating an endowment that would ensure its survival and growth. Martinez helped navigate the legal requirements, modifying the trust parameters while maintaining its charitable purpose. Within a month, we had identified a suitable building, a former community center with good bones, but in need of renovation. Using Mark's preliminary designs as a foundation, the project began taking shape. I found myself at the center of it all, applying military logistical skills to civilian purposes, coordinating contractors, managing timelines, ensuring budgets were respected. The work gave purpose to days that might otherwise have been consumed by grief. Each morning brought new challenges, each evening a sense of progress. The teens from the program often visited the construction site, their excitement about the new facility infectious. Through it all, the legal proceedings against Jennifer continued in the background. Detective Morales kept me updated on developments, additional victims identified, evidence mounting of a sophisticated criminal enterprise. Jennifer herself remained in custody, denied bail due to flight risk and the severity of the charges. "They're looking at decades of prison time," Morales told me during one update. "The financial crimes alone carry significant sentences, and now they're investigating potential medical evidence as well." Justice was proceeding, but it no longer consumed my focus. Something had shifted, a realization that while pursuing Jennifer was necessary, building something positive from Mark's legacy was equally important. 3 months into the renovation project, I received an unexpected visitor at the construction site. Thomas Wilson, Mrs. Wilson's son who had helped with repairs at Mark's house, arrived with an unusual request. "I'm working with a group of veterans transitioning to civilian construction careers," he explained. "We're looking for practical training opportunities